Hello there, my name is Daniel Backer, and this is Lawrence Backer. And since I work a 9-to-5 job, nothing interesting happened between this last video that I made and this video that I'm making now. So we're just going to start talking about White Men Can't Jump. A really awesome movie that not a lot of people would really expect as an awesome movie if you haven't seen it. So the reason that I rewatched it recently was because I saw a post on Reddit that said it was one of Stanley Kubrick's favorite movies, and I found this very surprising because just the title of White Men Can't Jump sounds kind of silly. The cover of White Men Can't Jump just looks like one of those 90s movies. In fact, the only thing that I had really known about White Men Can't Jump before deciding to watch it was that it was one of those movies that I would always pass in Blockbuster and just never rent. I'd never really looked into it. I didn't know anything about it. And to be fair, I actually heard part of this movie waking up after a sleepover in high school once. One of my friends who was an early bird had woken up early and he put it on. And I heard one of the iconic lines from this movie, foods that begin with the letter Q. But other than that, I didn't really have any association with this movie. But Stanley Kubrick is no slouch in the arts game. Made some pretty good movies that you have probably seen or heard of. And so I figured that I would watch it, and I ended up watching it several times since rewatching it or watching it for the first time earlier this year. And it totally makes sense. This isn't one of those sort of one-off things. Like, I know Paul Thomas Anderson talks about how one of his favorite movies is Jackass, and I think that a lot of these artsy directors almost feel required to throw in a lowbrow film just to keep everybody guessing and show that they're not too pretentious or too much of a snoot. But this is definitely not one of those cases. White Men Can't Jump is an excellent movie with an excellent script and excellent performances all around. So basically, just from an entertainment standpoint, it's incredibly enjoyable. This isn't just an artsy film that makes you think the entire time and doing like formally interesting things that you have to be a filmmaker to appreciate. This is a very enjoyable movie that's really easy to follow. There's never points when it drags or anything like that. But if you're a writer, I think you can really benefit from watching this movie because it's very economically told. Every single scene justifies itself. Every single scene has stakes. Every scene really uses all of these concepts that I've been talking about, the anticipation of action, character actions in order to define character, and character change. And speaking of character change, I noticed no one has watched that video so far. And in fact, I actually talk a lot about White Men Can't Jump within that video, so I decided to just make an entire video specifically about White Men Can't Jump and why it's so awesome. Okay, let's get into it. Obviously, I am going to be getting into some spoilers, and so if you don't want me to spoil anything in the movie for you, go ahead and stop this video and just go watch it and then watch this video afterward. And then go watch White Men Can't Jump a couple more times just so you get the point. So, first of all, the movie opens up in Venice, in Los Angeles, and they've got these guys that are singing. It's a barbershop quartet. They're singing out on Venice Beach, and Woody Harrelson comes up to the basketball court, and a bunch of guys are playing basketball, right? Now, what's interesting about these character introductions is that you don't exactly know what Woody Harrelson is doing. He's kind of dressed like a dorky guy, and all of these cool guys are out there playing on the court, and so Woody Harrelson sort of takes advantage of that. Now, what he does is he pretends to be this dorky white guy that comes up to play with everybody else, and they basically, or specifically, Wesley Snipes decides to bet against Woody Harrelson, but Woody Harrelson reveals halfway through that he's a really good basketball player. And aside from just this character introduction, introducing the fact that Woody Harrelson is a hustler and basically, like I said, pretends to be nerdy and bad at basketball in order to trick people into betting against him, and then he wins their money, this is an amazing opening scene. It's so dynamic. It goes on for a really long time, too. And also, it shows you that Wesley Snipes is an amazing actor. I think a lot of people probably just think of him as from Blade, where he plays a really stoic guy and not very expressive, but he plays such a funny and dynamic character with a lot of range and a lot of depth in White Men Can't Jump. And especially in that first scene, he is just bragging all over the place and really showboating around. And that perfectly introduces his character within the movie, that he's a guy that just loves to showboat. Woody Harrelson later accuses him of saying that, or accuses Wesley Snipes that he would rather look good and lose than look bad and win. That's basically the core of Wesley Snipes' character here. So they end up having this shootout at the beginning, and Woody Harrelson wins. He goes back to the apartment. I'm not going to go through the entire scene by scene of this movie, but basically what is established within those first few scenes is those characters' dominant psychological problem that they're going to be dealing with throughout the entire movie. So just to recap, we've got Wesley Snipes, who's a showboat, and we've got Woody Harrelson, who basically hustles people for money. Wesley Snipes does that too, but Woody Harrelson hustles people for money, but his issue ends up being is that he is addicted to hustling people for money, and that is the problem specifically that he has to deal with throughout the movie. So Woody Harrelson goes back, and we get to Rosie Perez, who is Woody Harrelson's girlfriend, and she is inside their apartment studying to be on Jeopardy. That's where that line comes from. Foods that begin with the letter Q. That is one of the categories that she's studying for on Jeopardy and ultimately gets to play with on the show later in the movie. So she has a fantastic character introduction too, because the very first shot of her that you see in the movie is her reading this book in front of her face, and she pulls it down to reveal her face all inquisitive-like. So I think that this is something that can be applied to a script or to a book or a piece of fiction, but I think it's a little bit more effective in a film because it is so visual that her entire character is basically summed up in that first shot. This is a really good practice to follow, to not just introduce your character that's just doing something irrelevant. Introduce a character that's doing the main thing that they're going to be doing in the entire movie. Now, you don't have to give everything away, but it's basically, cluing the audience into the fact that she is going to be studying and going to be on Jeopardy, but also that she is very thoughtful, maybe a heady character, even though she's very dynamic and very fun too. And this movie is going to make you fall in love with Rosie Perez, by the way. She is so good in this movie. So, basically, I forget exactly when this happens, but it's definitely still very early in the movie. Wesley Snipes knocks on Woody Harrelson and Rosie Perez's door, and they freak out. They're like, oh my god, they're here for the money. But it turns out it's just Wesley Snipes, and he's basically like, oh my gosh, Woody Harrelson, you're an amazing basketball player. We need to team up together so we can hustle people. And so they're like, okay, cool, let's join forces. But then, a little bit after that, it turns out there are some people that Woody Harrelson and Rosie Perez owe money to, and so they have to run out of their apartment. Now, this is a thread that I think could be pretty easy to forget about as it goes because they don't dedicate a whole lot of screen time to it, but this is this idea of stakes. Because the main reason that Woody Harrelson gets addicted to hustling and basketball is that he needs the money. Now, I think there's a lot of other psychological things that are going on here too, like it's his pride, it's his meaning in life, but I think one of the reasons that specifically money is the reason for this is that they give you these people that Woody Harrelson owes money to, and it's a constant source of stakes throughout the movie. So it's not just bad that he loses a match or loses a bet against someone when he's hustling because he doesn't win the money. He ends up basically needing to fight for this money for his life so that these people don't come up and kill him. And there is one point in the story too where these people that are trying to get the money from Woody Harrelson show him all of these Polaroids of dead people with blood splattered on the ground. And so again, they're like, hey, this is going to happen to you if you don't pay us this money. Excellent source of stakes. So I think that this is something in a lot of scripts that people don't necessarily take advantage of, or it's a little bit vague. I think the average script or the average story, or something that I constantly deal with, is that even though the scene seems to have stakes, it's not quite as clear as it could be. So perhaps if I was writing the script, I would have just been like, oh yeah, then he loses the money and he doesn't get the money. Make it so it's really clear to the audience when they're watching it that if he doesn't get the money, that's actually bad as well. So again, these guys that are trying to get the money from Woody Harrelson, that really just ramps everything up so much. So consider putting something like that into your story or script so that the audience would be able to watch the scene or the entire story and be able to tell from watching it, it's not just bad because they lose. Losing is bad because of these extra things, these very specific things that are going to happen. Now, little by little throughout the story, Rosie Perez's character ends up adding a great degree of stakes to this story as well, because she ends up basically saying, like, Woody Harrelson, you're a fool. You need to stop hustling and just get a regular job. And so we also get this added sense of stakes for every single bet or hustling match. That's definitely not what it's called, but you get the idea. Every time that Woody Harrelson engages in a competition with somebody, we know that he might lose Rosie Perez. Again, those are very clear stakes. It's not just him losing the match and it's a bummer. If he loses these matches and loses this money that he bets, Rosie Perez might leave him. That's a very specific and clear thing from watching the movie that you can tell is that added sense of stakes. So, again, be specific with your stakes. It adds a lot of tension to the movie and helps you root for your character so that they don't lose things. I think a lot of this, too, comes into this idea of the anticipation of action that I've talked about in another video. So, anytime that he does lose a match, which, spoiler alert, happens several times throughout the story, you anticipate that there's going to be consequences of that. And it's not vague consequences, like, oh no, where's he going to get the money? He knows he's got to go home and tell Rosie Perez that he lost all of their money. So this is that sense of the anticipation of action. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know that Rosie Perez is going to have something to say about this every time Woody Harrelson has to go home and say, lost the money, babe, it's bad. So, back to Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson teaming up. They decide to team up and hustle some other people for money, and it leads to this really, really funny scene of this guy not having enough money to bet against them, so he goes and tries to rob a small convenience store, but the guy recognizes him, makes him take off his hat, and then the guy robbing the convenience store sells the clerk his gun to get the money. I don't know. I think that's... It's almost silly, something that you would see in like a sketch rather than a movie, but the performances are so authentic, you just believe it. You're in. And the movie is technically billed as a comedy, so there are a lot of these moments in there, but again, I think that it's so grounded and you're rooting for these characters so hard. Basically, you give them a pass on that kind of thing. And I think that this is something that a lot of people can add to a lot of serious stories. Typically, people call it comic relief, but I don't really like to think of it as that. It's more of just, even if you're writing the most serious literary fiction in the world, life is absurd and life is funny. So I don't think everything has to be so somber and dry. Definitely give yourself some opportunities to go for some maybe heightened moments like that, just to keep things interesting for your audience and just to be more realistic. It's not realistic for everything to go through all doldrummy and boring like that. And like the bare naked ladies say, they're the kind of guy that laughs at a funeral. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but you get the idea. I think that basically humor is always something that you should inject in everything, even something that's kind of serious. So to get back to that, there's a second time that Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes team up in order to hustle somebody, but this time they lose, and so we get Woody Harrelson going home. He has to confess to Gloria, who's the character that Rosie Perez plays, that he lost the money, but Woody Harrelson realizes that Wesley Snipes hustled him. So this is a pretty interesting part of the movie because it's a good example of how the form of the movie actually takes on a similar tension as to what the characters are going through. So in a way, the movie hustles you a little bit because as they're playing this game that they lose, where in reality, or in the world of the story, Wesley Snipes is lying to Woody Harrelson, pretending to be on his side, but he throws the game in order to win the money. You, as an audience member, assume that that's not going on. You think that they just lose naturally, but later, when Rosie Perez takes them to Wesley Snipes' house so that they can try to get the money back, they open the door and all of the guys they were playing against are sitting there on the couch with Wesley Snipes. It's a really excellent reveal, and again, you as an audience member here get hustled along with Woody Harrelson's character. So looking for opportunities for you to do this in your story is something that can be tricky. You don't necessarily want to force it, but when it goes well, it's something that's really rewarding. And this is another one of those reasons that I think that outlining or planning something does not necessarily lead to those authentic moments like that. Build from your character actions and then find the way for the structure of your story to support those character actions rather than coming up with this vague structure and then trying to fill in the blanks like a Mad Lib. So, One of the best parts of the entire movie, and basically the diagnosis of Woody Harrelson's problem in this movie, is on the bus ride over to to Wesley Snipes' house when they're trying to get the money back. So, Rosie Perez's character says to Woody Harrelson, "Sometimes when you win, you lose, and sometimes when you lose, you win. See, winning and losing is just this organic globule from which one extracts what one needs." Now, what's interesting is that Woody Harrelson, upon hearing this, does not understand at all. And granted, it is a very strange thing to say, so I'm going to break it down just a little bit. She says, "Sometimes when you win, you lose, and sometimes when you lose, you win. But winning and losing is just an organic globule from which one extracts what one needs." So basically, Woody Harrelson's problem within this movie is the fact that he is so addicted to winning, so addicted to hustling, so addicted to manipulating people in this way that he is just tunnel vision on winning. He just absolutely cannot lose. Now, since we know that there are these pre-established stakes with Rosie Perez not wanting him to live this way, that winning and losing is not necessarily the entire thing. So, to break down that first part of it, sometimes when you win, you actually lose. Basically, he can win the game, but he can end up winning, but without integrity. He is hustling here, you know. I don't think she's specifically referring to that, but she's basically saying that winning and losing is just this organic globule from which one extracts what one needs. That it's basically something that's supposed to advance your purposes. If you win, but you don't advance your purposes, you've actually lost. So, but if you lose and you still have integrity, then you've actually won. You're still a coherent person that has a sense of values. But again, when she is... I hope I explained that well. If I didn't explain it well, I'll try to summarize it just one more time a little bit more simply. That, yeah, winning and losing is all about actually trying to get what you want. So if you don't get what you want when you win, then you've actually lost. But if you lose, but you still get what you want, or you still have your integrity, then you've actually won. So winning and losing is an organic globule. It's basically a construction. You can completely best the whole concept of winning and losing if you use it to get what you want. But again, Woody Harrelson doesn't get this. He thinks that winning is the only answer, losing is losing, cut and dry, just like that. So as the movie goes, Woody Harrelson obviously ends up losing again, loses a bunch of money, and Rosie Perez leaves him. So this is a good point in a story when things get as bad as they can possibly get for the character. And it's a really excellent scene because he comes back. Oh, I completely skipped over the part that leads up to this. So the reason that he loses this part right before Rosie Perez leaves him is that he and Wesley Snipes hustle a bunch of money, they're rich, and they win, but on the way back, they get into a little bit of an argument. And they basically say, white men can't jump. So Wesley Snipes starts messing with Woody Harrelson, saying that he can't dunk a basketball. And Woody Harrelson gets so heated that he's like, pull over. There's a court right there. I'm going to prove to you that I can. And he ends up betting all of the money that he just won in order to prove that he can dunk a basketball. Lo and behold, he cannot do it. He loses all of the money that he just won. So he goes home, he tells Rosie Perez, she gets pissed off, she leaves, and it's a really great monologue because she's basically screaming all of her Jeopardy studies at him, and the foods that begin with the letter Q! And she leaves. So this is when things get really bad, but like I said, things get as bad as they can possibly get because not only does she leave and hop in some random car afterward, but the guys who Woody Harrelson owes money to also show up right there, and they're like, oh, you suck. And then the like sprinklers coming down because their apartment catches on fire, or the place where they're staying because they left their other place. So this is definitely something that I have probably a weakness for in a lot of the stories that I write, is that I don't necessarily ever put that in there or make my stakes clear enough so that the audience can tell, oh, all of those specific stakes that you said were going to happen, now they all happened. Rosie Perez left. The guys who need the money from him, they showed up. His apartment that he keeps having to run away from to get away from those dudes, it's on fire. Give yourself an opportunity to make things get as bad as they possibly can for a character. Because, one, it's just really fun to watch, but two, you end up getting a more fleshed out version of who your character actually is. Because I think a lot of people like to put in the positive qualities of a character, but if everything goes terrible, How does the character react to that? It gives them this much more rounded impression, and especially if you are trying to go for a big character change, this is when you can look at it as all of those original qualities and problems that you've established from your character are laid to bear. They're raw and trembling. They don't have anything left. So, little by little, he picks himself up. He asks Wesley Snipes for some help, and they end up hustling again. I believe he asks one of Wesley Snipes' friends to get Rosie Perez on Jeopardy. She gets on Jeopardy, and she wins a bunch of money. So then Woody Harrelson comes back, and he brings a guitar, and he sings, and he's like, he basically quotes a line from earlier in the movie. Again, I can't recount the whole movie. There's not enough time, but he does a callback to one of the earlier scenes in the song, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love you. You're great." So then they're canoodling in bed, and the next morning, Rosie Perez says, "I want you to take my Jeopardy winnings and get yourself a job. Buy a nice suit. Go out there." And Woody Harrelson's like, "Whoa, are you sure you want to trust me with that?" So he ends up, surprise, surprise, teaming up with Wesley Snipes again to bet the money on a game. So what's interesting is that he tells Rosie Perez before this game, "Hey babe, I'm gonna go and play with Wesley Snipes." That's not the line, but you get the idea. But then Rosie Perez very, very sadly realizes in this moment is that, like, oh no, this guy's addicted to hustling. There's nothing that he's gonna do to change. This is too bad. And so she just goes goodbye, and it's super sad, and she roller skates away. So then Woody Harrelson is like, "Huh, that was kind of interesting, but I don't think I just got broke up with. I'm gonna go ahead and play that game with Wesley Snipes." So then we get the last game with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes, and lo and behold, not only did they win, but Woody Harrelson scores the winning shot by dunking the basketball. It's a great cinematic moment, but consider this for your character change or for your last scene in the movie. If there is something that your character has been struggling with the entire time, at least give them an opportunity to confront that struggle by the end. This is definitely a time to test your character to see if they've grown and changed. And so we can look at this in one way and be like, yeah, he became a better basketball player throughout the course of the movie, or at least proved that he could dunk the basketball after all. But what's interesting is he goes back to their hotel, and Rosie Perez is gone. So she did break up with him. He did lose Rosie Perez in the end because he was so addicted to hustling. But one of the most heartbreaking parts of this movie is him pacing back and forth while Wesley Snipes is basically twiddling his thumbs on the bed. And Woody Harrelson is like, sometimes when you win, you lose, and sometimes when you lose, you win, and it's just an organic globule. But he still doesn't get it. He doesn't get that it wasn't just about winning. Obviously, what Rosie Perez wanted him was to go get a job, but he didn't get it. He didn't get it through his head, and ended up losing the girl. And so, in my earlier video about character change, this is the spot where I said that he actually does not change. However, if you are writing a story that has sort of a sad ending like this, or the obstacle that you set up for your character, they end up not clearing, which in this case would obviously be him trying to learn about not hustling in order to keep his girlfriend, then you at least want their circumstances to have changed. And so in this case, it's rather obvious. Now he's single, and he even yells at Wesley Snipes in this scene and says that, "You told me to do this," or something along the lines. He tries to blame Wesley Snipes, and Wesley Snipes is like, "Listen, you're a grown man. You got to make that decision for yourself." And that's definitely true. So just to recap with this entire thing, because I could rant and rave about this movie, I also didn't even say a lot about Wesley Snipes' character, and he has a very interesting arc as well, in my opinion, where he basically learns to accept Woody Harrelson a little bit more. The movie ends with the barbershop quartet singing, which is, I think, a pretty common move, probably more so in film than in novels, but don't hold me to that claim too much. But just to basically leave where you've begun, it's just a good cue to the audience that things are wrapping up, that it's going to be the end. So consider putting something like that in your story. But overall, please watch this movie. I hope that my retelling of it was not your first exposure to this movie, because it's a very excellent and entertaining film that I think as a writer you can take a lot of things from. Again, it's very economical. All of the scenes are justified. It just really moves. There's great character actions. It's a really clear case of the protagonist dealing with a very clear problem and not necessarily surmounting it. So take this as your example of a great film. It's also a great showcase of Los Angeles. There's a lot of really great locations in there. I just keep saying really great, really great, really great. It's just really great all across the board. Hopefully it will make you write better stories. Lawrence, what do you think? I heard you babbling. Do you have your own YouTube channel? Huh? A rival podcast? Write better bird stories? Alright, I should stop this immediately.